All right. Well, welcome everyone to the first Educators Book Club. In case you haven't noticed, of 2025. Mark and Stephen, how's 2025 gone?
It's going well, or it's go. How's it going? Gone.
How's it gone?
Well, we're a month and a half, or nearly 2 months into it now.
True. What about you, Stephen?
It's going. It's already slipping away. It's like
Like,
feels like we haven't really started the year, but then it's also half 2/12 of the way there. So,
Two
like was
twelfths.
it grains of sand through the hourglass?
Yes.
Yes.
these are the days of our lives.
Something like that. We're going to be chatting for the next hour about the books that we've read, the books that you've read. We love you to jump up here and share. And if you want to use the chat, use the chat. It is recorded. We do pop it up on YouTube, so please just be aware of that if you do come up on stage. Things in the background and whatnot. But we will let you kick us off, Mark, unless there's anything else I've missed.
Any
Okay.
light banter we need to cover, Mark?
What's that?
Any light banter we need to address
No,
before?
no, no. That
Do
will
we
come in
do we need a
time.
note about this fabulous fashion that we're all
I think you need
wearing?
a bit of a victory lap, Mark.
Talk about the fashion, yes. Hang on.
Inspiration, process.
Hang
No.
on. I've got my
He's not,
screen sharing.
not taking part in that at all.
Did I not tell you about
Moving on.
my split attention before?
All right.
We should just say, in brief, Mark made the shirts, and they're amazing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, because Mark apparently will not be drawn on the matter of the creation of the shirts.
I felt
Simply
inspired,
multitasking is not possible.
We need to get our message out there. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
So, this is a book that I listened to that's not an education related or not about education in schools or anything like that. It's a book that I thought, oh, yeah, it's 800 words, 800 words, no, pages, 800 pages, and it took 8 hours to listen to the audio version. Now, the reason that I wanted to just bring it up in our Educators Book Club is that this guy Paul Ham. He's written lots of books about the Vietnam War, historical, like textbooks, really, kind of like factual non-fiction. And this was not so much about how to be religious or how to be spiritual. It's like the history of what people believe. So it was really quite fascinating in that regard. But then towards the end, it was starting to kind of be a bit more reflective of what does this all mean. And there was a few chapters on this phenomenon. And I just sort of Googled, I haven't read this academic paper, but this is about the electroencephalograph, I think it is. There it is. Encephalogram, which is like when they strap electrodes to people's heads, or more to the point to students' heads, and they see what is going on in terms of cognitive load and processing different parts of the brain, trying to kind of unravel the mysteries of learning. And so what he was saying, this author of the book, The Soul, was how dehumanizing it was, and how it kind of brought up the idea of, well, what's the purpose of education? If we're running around doing all this measuring, and it's not just about measuring brain waves, it's about even like the gait, like where the body is in the classroom. And so I heard about this sort of research a few years ago, and then as I kind of looked around, it is kind of a thing emerging. And so I found it was really interesting to bring up this sort of idea of kind of, I guess, the kind of individual learner in a context of a classroom, for example, and then if everything's kind of measured and kind of analysed and dissected and all that data, there's somewhere in the middle is the kind of soul that this author felt that the soul, poor little soul, was being kind of forgotten about. So what say ye? Well, like, I might stop sharing. That's
on
sort of
this
like a
grand,
big,
grand
a big grand
esoteric topic.
piece. Yes, exactly.
Why did you pick up the book, Mark?
Oh, I like that sort of territory. I
Hmm.
like, and even better if it's done in a kind of very logical, kind of sensible way. You know,
Mm.
I just sort of liked, so more or less what do people believe, but they went back. He went back 5,000 years, like very early days, and then everything seemed so sort of rational, logical. But it was, yeah, I like that kind of territory. So I was quite intrigued when he brought up about the kind of, well, I guess what's the purpose with all this measuring? And I thought, oh, that's a bit of a discussion topic,
Mm.
or not. You got any opinions, or what do you think about this sort of territory of could us? Is it possible that students are over measured, or is there something lost in all of this rush to
Mm.
gather data? I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it's such a complex topic, obviously,
It
Mark, and
is.
it's just made me think a little bit about. I wrote something that had some peer review feedback, and they'd said like, "What is the difference?" And Alan, I can see you in the audience as a global citizenship educator. What's the difference between global citizenship education and global competence from PISA? And that global competence kind of coming from that sort of preparing people for the workforce, instead of kind of just for the sake of preparing young people for the world. And PISA's kind of ultimate kind of aims and means of sort of preparing our young people and the testing that helps get us there. So yeah, I mean, I think it certainly all ties in.
Any opinions, Stephen?
It's over my head. I don't know what a EEG is, or
Oh yeah. Haven't you seen those headsets?
I have. All that I know is my app's telling me that it's a 39-hour listen. Did you really do 39 hours in a
Oh
book?
yeah, no, I listen to it kind of while doing in the
Yeah.
garden, doing the dishes. Just every conceivable kind of activity not requiring brain usage,
Mm,
and just got through it all. Um,
Mm.
yikes.
anyway, I might just share another book that
Give it
I
a go.
I
Yeah.
won't go into the detail though, but this was another one.
Something less complicated we can have a thought on.
Yes, this is
What
of
are your
this
thoughts on
world.
40 hours on the
Hang
brain
on.
and the soul, Lottie?
This
I
is
don't
another
know.
one
It's too
that I was
much.
reading, and I've nearly finished. And
Just a soft start to 2025 there. Yeah.
this is about another book, yet another book about educational leadership. But I'll tell you more about this one next month, I think, because I haven't
Ooh,
quite finished it yet.
a
Um,
teaser.
yeah, but this is I am enjoying reading this one, so I'm going to leave it there.
Mm.
So that's me
Excellent.
done for the
Oh,
moment.
thanks, Mark. I will do a quick share and then we would love some of our audience to jump up. But Stephen will obviously share as well. One of the 20 million books he's read since November last year. But if you'd like to put the books you're reading in the chat, please do that. I'm not going to share everything I've read. I've done a lot of nonfiction reading, but this was one of the books I did read. I kind of, like all the educators out there in the world have been sort of exploring what does AI mean in education. And I've got Leon's book up next, The Next Word, AI and Teachers, and hopefully we'll get
Leon's or Matt.
Yeah, and Matt Esterman and maybe Nick Jackson along. So, that's a very good read in terms of, what's going on and what we need to start thinking about. The other book I want to do a bit of a shout out is if you are teaching in the classroom, a secondary school, or you've got kids, The Wild Robot. Do you know this? Do either of you know this book?
No.
No.
It's been made into a movie on DreamWorks, and it's such a sweet book. It's a chapter book, and it's basically places a robot gets, falls off a container ship, washes up, gets turned on by some curious animals, these robots are meant to sort of help humanity, help if you end up on a farm, you learn about farming and you become essentially a free worker for the farmer. So the robot learns from the animals on the island. It learns about nature. And there's a lot of othering that goes on at the beginning. Everyone thinks it's a monster. And then of course it helps and the relationships progress. But it's a very sweet book with a lot of big themes. It talks about climate change as well. And there sort of very briefly.
Sounds like it's going to be on the banned book list soon with those sort of topics covered. Sorry,
quite possibly. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. And the last thing that I've sort of just been discovering recently is this podcast I wanted to do a shout out for. I feel like this is, sometimes when you find something and it's like all your worlds collide. And this is what's happened when I started to listen to this podcast, because every resource they're mentioning, I'm like, I've just read that, or it's on my to read list, or that colleagues talked about that. Or I know Ellen's in the audience has also mentioned she went to a talk with these two women, and they run Thoughtbox Education, which is social and emotional learning. And they mention a lot of fantastic tools in these podcasts, not just sort of talking about a topic. So I've listened to systems thinking, empathy, COP29, all sorts of different topics. And they share quite a lot of kind of practical activities you can use in the classroom that they've used in their resources, which you need to pay for. But it's a really, interesting listen. A lot of, future reading recommendations and resources mentioned. So I'll pop those into the Wakelet.
And what's the the spirit of the title?
I think I've only listened to a few. I haven't quite worked it out, but the last one I listened to was on giving, and they talk about the inconvenience of giving, living in this kind of consumer-driven world. And they talk about how they're kind of seen as the crazy aunts because they make the pom-pom chickens when their kids just want a Darth Vader Lego set, possibly Disney sponsored, or they hand make a board game, that's, has every family member in it. So I think it's kind of like we maybe don't quite fit into the way society is. But they've done a lot of kind of very solid education work, like Reboot the Future. One of them previously worked there. So yeah, definitely worth a listen.
Ellen says that they've got a free community event. Is that the podcast people?
I think so.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
We'll find the link.
Triple well-being. Overall premise is the polycrisis is underpinned by the metacrisis of disconnection. So we need to reconnect to ourselves, each other, and the planet. There you go. Thanks, Ellen.
What's the polycrisis?
It's when all the crises convene and they feed each other. So,
multiple
for example,
crises.
Climate change, might impact food, farmers growing food, and then the crops fail. So then the farmers move off the land and they move to the cities. And then, then because it's overpopulated in the cities, that causes other problems. And so it's when multiple crises all intersect, which is linked to systems thinking.
Nice.
Yeah. Welcome to 2025.
And so the podcast, do they keep it light and
Yes.
poppy, or is it
Yes.
as sad as the polycrisis might
It's
make
light.
people feel?
It's light. It's poppy. And I love some of the strategies and analogies they use. And if anyone's listened to it and wants to share, they talk about hawking. I don't know if anyone here, maybe Matt might know this. People who work in leadership. So hawking, as leaders, we fly high above to get that big picture. We get the broad picture, and then we hover. So we really intentionally set our sights on something. We think about what we're doing. We consider what we're doing. We don't just dive in and make a quick decision, and then we, are prepared to kind of take that action. But they talk about lots of different strategies and things. So check it out. Let me know if anyone knows about hawking.
Songbook, talks about hawks and other animals. Okay.
Hawking, salmoning, trees, forests, all sorts of beautiful.
I haven't heard that exact
analogies.
phrase, but I kind of that whole holistic kind of thing is comes up regularly, as opposed to atomistic, if that's the opposite. kind of like looking at the overview and then weighing up the options in light of the bigger picture rather than focusing on just that one issue in isolation.
Mm.
But hawking, yeah, I'll have to look that up.
Well, and they talk about salmon, right? So they say
I
how
was going to say, what's salmoning?
salmon
Oh,
flow against the stream, but they do it for a reason. I didn't realize this. They do it because they swim back to where they were spawned, because that is the most healthy environment to reproduce. So, it's this idea of going against the flow to get back to, a really healthy environment to be making decisions, or, to be back in.
mm. So for a
Mm.
human, it'd be throwing out your iPhone or something, or going back to stay with your mum over the holidays, or
Well, maybe if that's the most healthy place for you, Stephen.
I wonder how many people would put their hand up to say that's the healthiest place I could have grown up. Who knows?
Stephen, are you going to tell us anything that you've been reading, or is anyone in the audience want to come up and tell us what they've been reading? If so,
Mm.
Yeah,
put
I'm
your
I'm the
hand up.
punishment. We're trying to get people up before me. Paul Stephen will talk for an hour if you don't have fun. Come on, people. Tell us what you've been reading. Even if it's a beach novel filled with sand in the cracks, still counts.
Oh. I think you might have to go, Stephen.
Guessing not on the
Yes.
punishments
I
Just
think
incoming.
takes a very long drink of tea, waiting,
I think
still waiting.
I just while Stephen's preparing his screen, I think I forgot to mention that with that Soul book, there was the whole concept was about AI. AI. It wasn't just about the electrodes on people's heads. It was specifically about AI and what does it mean to be human. That kind of. But
Hmm.
we're
Hmm.
still in that esoteric, big picture territory with that.
Well, I'm just stunned that they didn't lead with that. That's, you slap AI on anything these days. Oh, my
Well,
cat's
yeah,
going to.
it's
Oh, oh.
ubiquitous.
I'm
Happening all
surprised they
over
didn't call it
town.
the soul versus AI or something like that, Get people in. Could be. All right, I'll do some talking
All
then,
right,
people.
You can
you're
do
You
up.
some
asked
talking.
for it by your
Yep.
silence, I guess. Well, firstly, I got to blame Lottie for being like what he's read since November. I was like, I was just only going to talk about January, but okay, let's go back.
No, no, please don't. No,
No,
don't do it.
no,
You've got
No.
two books in there
Just
with the word
drowning
soul.
in books.
Yeah, well, I won't talk about the top ones because there's a lot of graphic novels in there. Because at the end of the year, I was just like, let's do something a bit lighter.
Mhm.
Someone recommended this one. I remember reading that out in Sydney. So whoever that was, I think maybe can't
Was
remember.
it young
Might have
for
been
young
Grant.
adults? No.
Young adulty, yeah.
Yep.
Or maybe, yeah, not too young, but it's got some risque themes in it, sort of. But it's basically, without spoiling the premise too much, there's a guy who checks up on, I don't know, spirits, basically, witches and mythology things. Chat's going to tell me who shared it, maybe? No, no. Okay. Anyway, and then he goes out to review one last, house in a cerulean sea, and it goes a bit sideways, and his whole life is
Mm.
turned around, and it's good. I really like this one, How to Do Nothing, which is
Oh.
a self-help book we all need, maybe. Um, it hasn't got a great review
Yeah.
score looking at it, which could be, due to the topic that it's got. Um, Well, really, why is the house in the Cerulean Sea banned? Oh, I guess the main character is openly gay. Maybe that's queer characters. There you go. And doing
Magic.
good. Oh, three
Doing good.
Yeah.
strikes. Queer characters, magic, and doing good.
All the
That's
biggies.
three things to get banned for. But yeah, it was interesting because it was like, yeah, he was a gay character, and they sort of didn't make a big deal of it, and it was just like anyway, and then on to the story. But
Mm.
I guess some people have banned it. This is kind of your anti. anti-self-help book, kind of like the what was that one that we all did, 100
Oh, are you back on
hours?
the? Do you need to click on another
100
tab?
hours. No,
Oh,
we
there.
can see it.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Worth a look, worth an interest. Someone mentioned,
How does that book kind of compare to something that comes from an Indigenous wisdom perspective, like braiding sweet grass? That sort of a
uh,
lot of the messages in those is sort of to slow down and be more intentional.
yeah, true. I would probably say Braiding Sweetgrass was superior to this one. It's, but I don't know. This one's sort of all over the shop, I guess, which is kind of fits the the theme, you know?
3.767.
Yeah, it just sort of hits you with a lot of. It's kind of like if an artist wrote a self-help book, you know? So it's sort of just like, hey, did you know this artist did this? And did you know some other random fact that you didn't know? And it's like, not really, but interesting. So it sort of weaves together very disparate threads, I would say.
How do you resist then? Like,
Um,
what's the key to resisting the attention economy,
it's
according
a
to this
lot
book?
of reflective practice and, getting back to nature and hugging some
Hmm.
trees and doing, it's not like take yourself out of the attention economy, but it's sort of be a bit more mindful of it. But yeah, it is a bit all over the shop now that I talk about it.
Putting away your putting away your phone, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah, not quite. It's sort of like put away your phone and here's, an obtuse art theory that you can explore. Anyway, someone said John Green was not popular anymore, and I was like, I don't think I ever did John Green, so I did a couple of his. Looking for Alaska was real good, and then the other ones were sort of just
What
all
was
right.
looking for Alaska?
Uh, it's like his attempt at an American classic, I guess. Like it's got sort of what's that famous American movie where they start off typing on a black and typing green text on a black keyboard, and it's like you know three boys walking through the forest. Nah, doesn't
Mm.
matter. Kind of like that sort of back in the old days nostalgia type of book.
Stand by
Stand by
me,
me,
says
possibly?
Ellen.
Stand by me. There you go. It's very reminiscent of that kind of genre of sort of back in the old days when we were kids.
Ellen
Everything
says
was
it's
better.
also banned in the US.
Well, there
On the
you
banned
go.
book list.
I was just doing the band book list. How I didn't even know. Um, and then 2025, we started off where we stayed, the B&B we stayed, had this book that was about a Japanese soldier who went back to Kokoda where a lot of his comrades were deceased, and he collected their bones and brought them back home. So I just happened to read that because it was on the shelf, and then as
Mm.
is my way, I got overly invested and read it. But actually, good books, Burn and Wood, real
You've read
good.
that, haven't you, Lottie?
Excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was based on your review. I was like, hmm. Oh no, I think actually Jem was like, here, I just picked up this book because she went, oh, that's from Macbeth. And then she started reading it, and then I started reading it and finished it first. And we spent the next month maybe being like, oh, what bit are you up to? Which I'm sure you can appreciate, because there was a lot of twists and turns where it's like, who's the main character? What's going on here?
Mm.
But I should stop waffling. I read this one. I read that one. I read that
Oh,
one.
wait. What was the death of expertise?
Pretty much what you think it would be,
Oh,
basically.
right. Yeah.
We
And
don't
then what
trust
was the
smart
third
people no
one
more.
along? Oh,
And then this was how Elon Musk destroyed Twitter,
oh,
which I
yeah.
put off reading for a long, long time. But it was very informative for all the things that happened quite recently. Sort of, um, yeah, very bizarre. Like, the news was reporting that he sent an email to a whole bunch of government staff saying, "What do you do in a week?" And then like reply to this email to prove what you do.
Mm.
That's kind of what he's done everywhere he's gone. Is sort of you just presume that the people that are working for you, um, in one case, don't exist. Like he was, I'm going to stop screen sharing, but he was convinced that there were fake workers working at Twitter, and he was like, "There's too many workers. I need you all to prove that they're real people." And everyone was like,
They're the
uh,
bot. They're
what are
the
you
bots.
talking about? They're working from home. And he was like, yeah, I think we might have bot workers here. And everyone was like, No, that's Dale and that's Tim and that's Jennifer and that's, they're over there. They're real.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just very eye-opening in that respect. It was written by like two New York Times journalists, and just they had a very good way of saying he's silly without saying he's silly. It was a
Have you
lot of
have you read the first
creative
one
life.
about his sort of initial rise to
No,
power, how he built even before SpaceX? What did he build? The money, the payway,
PayPal. Yeah.
PayPal, how he built PayPal. Yes, you see the beginnings of some of the ways he manages and stuff, like he sort of would fire people if you use acronyms. That was a rule at SpaceX when it first started and things.
Hmm.
Very interesting read.
Almost like an anti-leadership book. Like he's
Matt, come and tell
here's
us.
what not to do. We can talk about hawking and salmoning, but baseline should
I
be
wonder what Elon would think about hawking and salmoning.
he just uses the
Interesting.
firing and the passive aggressive emailing and slightly less holistic visions, I guess. But anyway, talk to us, people. What are some books we've been reading?
Helen, I feel like you have to come up here because you have contributed so much in the chat in the last, if you're comfortable to.
Okay. I'm in public, so I'm going to try to be quiet. So I put a list of ones I've been reading. So I read Breath by James Nestor, which is old news. I know everyone else has read it, a few years ago, but I found that so fascinating. I think Stephen read it, like a few years ago and mentioned it, and everybody I know has been reading it. So that's just a nonfiction because I mostly read fiction. Disruptive Women is created by the Women Ed organization. So it's written by many different people and edited by Vivian Porritt. And target audience could be anybody, but mainly women. And it was eye-opening for me in terms of policies and ways of thinking about women in workplaces that I just hadn't thought about. Having leave for miscarriage, leave for both men and women as a loss kind of thing, things like that I hadn't thought about. Wabi Sabi was a really beautiful book translated from Japanese, and it kind of reminded me of what Stephen was saying about that one about the attention economy. And it has really simple ideas about how to just simplify your life along the principles of Wabi Sabi. And it was a really kind of like, he had written the haikus. So it's just a really simple, beautiful book. I think everybody's read The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, but I just keep that one by my bedside table and reread it regularly because it's gorgeous. I did finish another John Green book, Paper Towns. That one was okay. But I do agree with Stephen that Looking for Alaska is fantastic and banned. And The Fault in Our Stars is great. I've never seen, it's also a movie, but I've never seen the movie. The Bletchley Riddle was so fun because Ruta Septes and Steve Sheinkin, who Ruta usually writes historical fiction, and Steve Sheinkin writes really readable nonfiction for kids, and they teamed up, and this is their first book together. And it had alternate narrators. So one, there were two different narrators who were brother and sister, and usually I also hate that in a book, but it was so fun. So it's more for like kind of maybe early teenagers, or I don't know, 12 and kind of that one. It's called The Bletchley Riddle. So
is it based on Bletchley Park in the UK?
So they're working in Bletchley Park. So it's about some part of the story is about cracking the Enigma code, and part of it is about a family mystery that's going on. So there's like two tracks, and it's an easy read. It's just so nice, and they're both just such fantastic writers. So I hope they do more together because that was really fun. Babel, I don't know how you say that, by R.F. Kuang. Probably somebody's mentioned that at some point. It was so fantastic. Have you all read that one before?
Yeah, I remember being mentioned. I think I balked at the length, but if two people have recommended it, then I have to read it.
So she's the author who wrote Yellowface. And when I was looking for Babel this summer, I found Yellowface and thought, okay, I'll read this. And one of my old students got in touch and said, you have to read Babel because it's way better. And one of my professors had mentioned Babel earlier in the summer. It's like, it's amazing because it's like a fantasy historical fiction. So it's set in the UK and China around the time of like when the Opium War is about to start. And so there's a lot of it that's completely like historically factual, but then there's total fantasy elements. And it's just, it'll probably be, if it's not already, it'll be banned. Oh, actually it is banned. I think all of her books are banned right now in the US because, and because it's about the power of empire, the destructive properties of empire, and how empires like amass wealth by extracting, everything from everybody and everything they can get their hands on. Yeah, and I did see, actually, I'm on a real banned book kick right now. I'm reading everything that's banned because I figure it's good, right, if it's banned. I just read a fiction called The Foxwife, and I just picked that up in Hong Kong just on a whim. And that was about, the fox mythology of kind of northern China and Korea. And yeah, just a fiction, but it was just, a nice, easy read. And I put in
Ellen, tell us what the fox mythology is, because there will be might be people who don't know what that means.
Yeah, so it's a whole mix of things actually, and this one went into a lot more than I imagined. But I guess some of it is there are foxes, actual foxes, who can turn into humans, mostly beautiful women, but sometimes men, who kind of like low-key, in Norse mythology, like they get up to some naughty stuff and they, drag people into mischief and love affairs and all kinds of stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's just interesting story. It's mostly taking place in Manchuria, but they also do pop over to Japan and then come back to Manchuria. But yeah, it's interesting. And I love to read books that are set in Asia. One thing I mentioned in here was that one, I think I saw it on Stephen's Goodreads, the Promises and Perils of AI in Education. I haven't read it, but I saw the author speak in Hong Kong last weekend, and they're really dynamic. And it was a really interesting keynote, just asking more questions than answering them about the biases that exist in AI platform, like systems, like the large learning models. And so that was really interesting, thinking about those ethical kind of things. And right now, I'm reading a bunch of things. I'm reading When by Daniel Pink. Still, I keep getting stuck in that one and like reading that. I'm also reading The Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, he's a Native American author. His first book was called There, which was set in Oakland, California. And it was just, I thought it was stunning. So this is his second book, but I've only just started that one. Seems good so far. And then this book, I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm reading this book right now, which is so fantastic. And I went to the author's book talk last week as well. It's called Learning to Relearn. And it's about culturally responsive education. And his context is America, but it's really applicable to international schools. And I think any schools really. So the whole first part of the book is talking about, it's sort of just a foundation, talking about kind of being white, talking about being Black, being Latina, being Indigenous, being Asian, Asians living outside of Asia. So foundations of that. And then the second half of the book that I've yet to read is about how to create belonging in your classroom, how to recognize the identities of the students that you have and, create a culture of belonging in your classroom, starting with yourself, like knowing yourself and understanding your own biases, and then moving on to like, how do you create that inclusive classroom? And he has, I'll put in the chat, he has a website that goes with that has lots of great resources, and he has a couple of articles. So I'll just pop those in the chat as well. But I'm trying to be more like Stephen this year.
Oh, we
So
all
I,
are.
yeah, I want to, because I think I was spending too much time. Well, I listened to loads of podcasts, just loads of podcasts, and I've been trying to be really specific. I want to try to read at least one book per week, and I'm trying to find more nonfiction books that I enjoy because fiction is my go-to. So I am so far I'm on track in 2025, but I have some work trips coming up, so I think I might get off track, but I'm going to try to stick to 52 books this year. And so I'll keep coming back to reports, but I'll put those links in the chat.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Catherine's asked a question in the chat of you.
Oh yeah, she said, what does it mean for a book to be banned in the US? Do they burn it or do they?
Oh, it depends. So there's different kinds of bans. I'm not from the US, but I just follow all of these. There are some federal bans, which means that they can't be in Department of Defense schools and they will not be in any like public libraries, et cetera, et cetera. If sometimes, because they're state by state as well. So sometimes in a state it'll be banned. I hope they're not burning books, gosh. But I think they're taking them out of public libraries, they're taking them out of school libraries, those kind of things. But I think they're always, I'm not sure at a federal ban if they actually get taken out of bookstores. I think people still have access to them in, bookstores and buying them online and those kind of things. But I think that when you take them out of libraries, that means that, people who can't afford to buy books are going to lose access to them. So the equity is completely destroyed, right? And so, yeah, so most of my favorite books ever are top of the banned book list, like 1984 and A Brave New World and A Handmaid's Tale. And like, I love classic dystopian, and those are the top banned books, Parable of the Sower. Yeah. So yeah, and just, I don't know, as soon as I started following banned books, my algorithm threw me more things about banned books. And so now it's my big topic. So I joined a couple of banned book reading challenges on Storygraph, and I think that Imagine Goodreads has them too. And so I've already, one of them, there's, I don't know, 30 banned books on the list or something, and I've already read like 26 of them just in my life. So I think the books I like to read are the ones likely to get banned.
Hey, Jean.
Yeah, I'm wondering, would you rather have your book banned in America or on the book list in Australia? To be like, you could traumatize a whole generation of kids by it being on the book list in a country, but if you're on the banned list, that probably means your book's going to be famous forever. Like it'd be a short-term hit to your sales, but then long-term to be like, well, now it's getting media because it's on the banned list and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, oh yeah, Alan, I was going to ask the Babel. I didn't like Yellowface. I found it horrifying.
In what way?
Like gut-wrenching, because it was like so believable, I'm sure we've all been, on social media at various times and you get into a Barney with someone or whatever. And it was like each step it got worse and the main character got themselves into deeper and deeper trouble. And I was like, yeah, I just found it gut-wrenching. I was like, oh, don't do that. And then you're like, oh, off they go doing it again to the point where, there's a homicide occurring, and you're sort of like, well, this is believable.
Yeah, the Babel one's completely different, and she wrote it before. She also has written this trilogy called The Poppy Wars, and a friend of mine said the Poppy Wars are not as good as Babel, and a former student who I completely believe said Yellowface is just, I have this feeling that she was angry or irritated about that sort of social media publishing world kind of thing, so she just whipped off a book about it, boom, because it's outside her usual genre, because usually she's in kind of like fantasy sci-fi mixing with reality and historical fiction kind of thing. Yeah,
I don't know, I felt like it was too real. Like I was like, this has definitely happened to the author. Like there's no not, and obviously it had been amped up for a fictionalization, but I was like, ugh, this is gut-wrenching.
Yeah, the Babel is like really a thick one, and it's set in, so it's set mostly in Oxford. They're in Oxford. They're going to the university in Oxford, and then it's also set in China, and it's just empire, right? So it's all those British Empire, kind of themes. and it's believable because that aspect of it is true, but then there's fantasy mixed in. I won't give away the secret of how it's fantastical, but it's amazing how she mixes the fantasy into actual history. I found it just really, really incredible.
Well, can I talk about another book? Because that's reminded me of another book that was also gut-wrenching.
Oh no.
I'd love people to read it. So Ella Baxter, first-time Australian author. She wrote Woo Woo, which is kind of like a blend of comedy and thriller. So it's about the main character is a famous artist. You can see black, polarizing. It was somewhere in a book club app or something. It was somewhere. I think in my wife's actual book club where they read the same book. So it's obviously one that is sort of, polarizing. But yeah, a mixture of comedy, but then it also has a plot that's about the main character being stalked in a similar way to Yellowface that I felt gut-wrenching was a gut-wrenchingly real to the point that I was like, oh, it's happening to me where we've stolen their book and the social media, this person's coming to get us. In very much the same way, this artist is like it's very funny because they're making fun of the artists and artists sit around and do nothing and whatever. But then at the same time, she's being stalked and the stalking is very, very real. And then you get to the end and, she says, thanks to my stalker. And you're like, it was real. But also it's meant to be funny at the same time. So it's gut-wrenching, but funny. But then you can't laugh at the funny because you're like, but it's too real. But if anyone wants to read a 3.25 stars rated book, I'd love to hear your thoughts and see what you think. Because Jem was like, this book's funny. And I was like, this book is horrifying. I've never been stalked, thankfully. But, terrible. Not good stuff. Anyway, thoughts?
Books. Hey, talking of Bletchley Park. I read The Rose Code by Kate Quinn, one of those sort of holiday reads. And something that was really interesting about Bletchley Park was where the for anyone who hasn't heard of it, I'm sure everyone has, it's where the during World War II, the code breakers broke the code, but they recruited they needed sort of the brightest minds, and so they sort of went off to all the universities and they essentially recruited a lot of neurodiverse individuals. And it was very interesting because they just had to let people kind of work in the conditions that they needed to crack these codes, because this was literally whether a town gets bombed and you lose tens of thousands of lives, and winning the war was based on it. So it became a really interesting safe haven for neurodiversity in a time when it really wasn't tolerated. So it was a really interesting thread through, bit of a holiday read.
What was the name of that one?
Rose Code by Kate Quinn. She writes a lot. It's all historical fiction. It's all got a female protagonist. It's all true stories of, it's all loosely based on real people. And her other books are fantastic too. She takes this finds these amazing characters that, did amazing things, and brings their stories out into the world.
I just had to share screen because it's almost a genre of itself. The woman and or man from behind. It's like instantly you've got to be like, it's a historical novel,
yes,
based on reality, but it's
yes,
anyway.
Absolutely. Mark, The Body Keeps the Score. Yes, tell us about this book.
Yeah, there's quite a few books of that sort of nature. I guess it's that kind of body-mind connection, and it kind of looks at illness, chronic illness, or, and its relationship to stress or trauma. Like really fascinating and like very kind of considered, and a little bit kind of thought-provoking maybe. Because it's kind of like, oh, all right.
Yeah. And it's sort of the research starts in the
Here it is.
from the Vietnam War, doesn't it, Mark? I
I'm not
believe.
sure if that was the trigger, or I guess
I
it's
think that might have been the beginning of the journey when he started working with vets or looking into the research around vets and
I,
the trauma that was stored in the body. I've dipped in and out of it over the years, and so it's a
yeah.
bit muddled in my mind.
Yeah, see, I guess this is not the only book of this nature that I've read.
Mm.
So I too am a little muddled with the but I guess it's that kind of it's the theme, like as the byline says, it's the connection between brain, mind, and body, what it looks like, how it manifests, or and a lot of this is sort of well, I guess it's the kind of like developments in the technology used in medical research. They kind of like can get evidence for a lot of these things now,
Mm.
whereas 15 or 25 years ago, it wasn't as kind of clear. So it is really interesting. It's sort of like got this whole resurgence, or people are revisiting this sort of territory. But yeah, I found it really worth reading.
The,
Brilliant.
the whole first part of the book, and I've been listening to it. I think if I was actually reading it with my eyes, I would quit because it's scientific, but it's not too scientific. But it's for me, it's a good read for like I go for big walks and I listen to it. But he kind of goes through the whole like history of psychiatry, right, in the 20th century and talking about all the things that they've discovered. And he's pretty critical of the DSM and how they're like failing to take on developmental trauma as a diagnosis. And yeah, and so that I think I'm up to chapter 10 or 11. And it goes through all of the things about like childhood abuse, war trauma, like you mentioned, Lottie. And yeah, it's fascinating. But I think if I was reading it on like actual paper, I'd get all bogged down, like I needed to take notes or something. But otherwise, it's for me a good walking read.
Mm.
Let it wash over you. Yeah.
I know Matt's going to come up and do some sharing in a minute. Mark, you haven't told us about your background.
Oh, I haven't. Yes, this is the City of Sydney Library at Haymarket. It's a kind of looks like a bird's nest. It's a kind of like a round building. But yeah, it's a lovely library, very contemporary building. I was there the other day. I was doing some video production nearby, and I popped in. I didn't borrow anything, although I am a member of City of Sydney Library. So that, and then these people are you can't quite see them. I'm covering them.
Court.
And then I had another photo, but I wanted to get this one because it's got the visual motif of like the magazines, whereas kind of yeah, it's still kind of nice to have books
Yes,
in these
always.
digital times. So that's
Matt,
the background.
Matt, come up and tell us what you've been reading. You seem to, Matt, I must say, you seem to
Matt's an avid
motor through
reader.
the books with
Yeah.
the reviews.
Yeah, I've got a few saved up, but I don't know. I just feel like sometimes I'm reading and not doing anything with it. So it was just a useful exercise. And now I don't know, I just like doing it. So I have got a lot of them chained up. So I'm not reading a book every, 60 minutes. That's just the way twice a week that I'm just getting them out so then I can focus on new things. I ran upstairs because I'm packing for year 9 camp, which I'm very excited about.
Where is Year 9 camp going? Shall we into the wilderness or?
This one is Phillip Island.
Did you get into the cabin you wanted? Like, are you with your friends or?
I'm the leader, so I get to choose.
No.
Ultimate power.
Oh, I'm stuck with the
Choosing a
teachers
cabin.
again. They're so boring.
There's
Oh,
no cabins far enough away that that'll grant me a good night's sleep, I think. So I've grabbed 3 things from the pile. The first one is this. So Last Child in the Woods is a book I bought, and I only know I bought it because the receipt's still in the front page, but I bought it in 2010. it formed part of my, I guess, like thesis for my outdoor ed degree. And so I came back to it just in looking at some things around connection and disconnection. And the term is nature deficit disorder in the book, and it's basically about children just not getting into nature enough. But there's some really interesting points about how we design our world for adult function and not considering, children and their development, and some interesting points. I think like you can't design the whole world for kids, but certainly in all of these new estates and things, there's a lot of thought into green spaces, but perhaps not who's using those green spaces. So that was interesting to read again and come back to. I read Drive by Daniel Pink. And that is just from some further work I'm looking at with self-determination theory, because I really like that theory, but I'm also looking at critiques of it to try and balance, because not everyone likes it.
What are the critiques of it?
Oh, I'd have to go into my notes. I think
Okay.
there's always an argument about the benefit of a carrot and a stick. And I guess Drive is all about kind of anti-carrot and stick, but there are certain things, I guess, in building momentum with motivation. The carrot and the stick is sometimes the thing you need to get the engine going. And there's just these two camps where one is absolutely not, like no extrinsic motivation. Everything should be intrinsic. And then there's, well, we can have a bit of both. And they're kind of in the middle whispering it so they don't upset either side. And then there's the people who are just like, you should motivate yourself and nothing outside should ever drive you. But yeah, I've got a couple of Daniel Pink books that I'm trying to get through, just because he writes in an interesting way. Like, I think there's some very complex ideas and theories that are explained in an easy to absorb way, which helps as the term has started. And, I want to read something, but I'm exhausted. And then the last thing is Shoe Dog, I read, which is a very cool book. And just I've been told there's some things about Nike that are a little bit dodgy. I haven't looked into that yet, like sort of the history, but just a cool story, starting from selling shoes out of the back of the car and then running into the right people, having the right conversations, and being genuinely entrepreneurial. I think there's a lot of skills in that entrepreneur mindset that we need to really focus on in delivering to our students. So that was just an interesting read, and I'd recommend it very highly.
The other thing that was interesting about that book, I thought, Matt, was the running community and how that they were sort of the customers, but like all the original salespeople, right? They were kind of like really hardcore runners, and it's like they just believed in the product.
Yeah. It's like to an almost like a cultish manner, like just they latched on. And I think
there's
that's
big
true
brands
of like these companies. Even when talking about Elon earlier, and I was packing, so I was desperately trying to listen and focus on not forgetting to put socks in the bag and things like that. But like he has the cult following as well. It's just like this charisma that
emotion.
Once you unpack it, there's a lot going on for Mr. Musk, but there's enough there initially to get people along for the ride. And Phil Knight had that, and this community was built. And then they, beyond that, got into the basketball arena, and things took off massively. But yeah, just a
And
real
the
underdog story.
original trips to Japan were very interesting as well. Just sorry, it's coming back to me,
No.
right? When is it? It was this book, right, where he went to Japan and was
Yeah, he was selling Japanese shoes out of
yes, and we had to negotiate like with this foreign culture that he just he didn't know anything about. It was a very interesting interaction.
Yeah, and just that skill of negotiation taken to the extreme when you really need to get your point across because the person you're negotiating with does not understand what you're saying. And then coming back and negotiating with people who do understand, like you can just blow them away.
Mm.
It was a cool book. Anyway, they're my three. There's many more. I read Amy Green's Wellbeing Leadership. That was very cool. Good follow-up to the first one, Teacher Wellbeing.
How is it different
Lots of
to
really
the first?
relevant stuff for my
How is
role.
it different? Like, what's the leadership angle of the well-being? This second book, I mean.
So I think if I was to summarize it really quickly, the first book was, I guess, about looking after yourself as an educator. And then the second book is about, well, how do I look after a team of educators as the one responsible for, I guess, being their leader. And rather than looking at all of the things that leaders are forced to look at in terms of, data and evidence and all those kind of things like policies and strategic directions, like the best place to start is with the people and making sure that they have a place they can work in and feel safe in and be effective in. And then everything else will kind of come together around that. But it's more about the practicalities of building that team and supporting their well-being as a priority rather than the part D or E or whatever it is. It was a nice, natural kind of follow-up. And other things as well. But that's me.
Wonderful.
Cute.
What's the book you got behind you, Lottie, on the shelf?
Which
It's all
one?
blue and white and red and what is it, a
Iceberg?
picture? Copy? My eyesight's
This one?
Yeah, no, to
Queen.
the right, that way.
That
No,
way.
that way. That one. What's
This one
that, Vicky?
This is like a little poster and it says, "Today will be full of great things." It's not a book.
Okay. It's a good reminder.
It is a good
If only I
reminder.
could read it.
This is a beautiful Iceberg is a
feel
beautiful picture book, which again, it tells I've been doing a bit of work with sustainability and systems thinking and some studying with it. And I've been thinking a lot about connection to nature in education, but how do we build empathy? And I've been doing a bit of a deep dive of books that tell stories from nature's perspective. So Elif Chirac's beautiful book that came out a couple of years ago was told from the tree's perspective. This book's told from the iceberg's perspective, which is unfortunately melting. Just different perspectives on things. Shaking it up.
Unfortunately melting.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And on that sad note,
Well, I was going to say, as we're also melting, but then my
Yes.
cat fell off the desk, so.
oh no, cat.
So we're preparing to wrap it up.
Yes.
Indeed.
Thank you everyone for sharing. And
I think we've had more links this.
Yeah, I'm excited to have it back because I was looking at my
before.
books and thinking, these books all suck. Are there some good suggestions? 'Cause it's like without this group, I just get a random smattering of whatever I find in a random B&B and then go, gee, that was weird. Why'd I read that? But now I've got a list of things to actually do. Alan, sorry.
I just popped one in because Lottie was talking about the perspective of nature. I popped in a novel. It's like the most amazingly well-written novel, but it's one of the narrators is an octopus, and I love that idea. And I think I heard it's being made into a movie or a miniseries or something like that. But yeah, I
Is
was
this
one of
Remarkably
those.
Bright Creatures?
Yeah. And so I like Stephen's finding books in B&Bs. I was just in the airport and I thought that's a cool cover. And I love this idea of an octopus being a narrator. And yeah, and it's kind of, it reminded me of my octopus teacher, and yeah, so it's I found as a novel, it's a little bit not as complex as I would like, but it's a sweet story.
Thanks, Ellen. I'll do one quick more shout out from Nature's Perspective. I read Cold Coast recently. It's by Robin Munday, and it's really interesting. It's about, in 1932, there was the first female fur trapper who went out to the Arctic, and you know, at a time that was very male heavily, you know, industry. And so it's the story of, her going out and the perils of that. But some of the chapters are told from Arctic foxes' perspectives. And I think a polar bear does a chapter maybe. But I didn't seek it out. That's it. Yes, I didn't seek it out. I just kind of, it came to me. And then I was like, oh, here's another book told from Nature's Perspective. Interesting. Thank you.
All right, wrap us up, Mark. We got to the end. You're the person in the library.
Really?
You need to shush us so we go to sleep now.
Okay.
Send Matt off packing to the camp.
Whoa.
Good luck at camp, Matt.
Yeah.
I hope you have a brilliant time.
I think, special thank you to Ellen and Matt for all those books and suggestions, and, you know, all the detail as well. So,
so many links.
So we'll have to, well, I don't know how to wrap this up. I'm not sure. Thank you, everyone.
We'll be back.
For joining us. We'll be back next month for another Educators Book Club. So hopefully, you know, you'll feel comfortable enough to pop up and tell us what you've been reading. Any final thoughts, Lottie and Stephen? No.
Yes.
Well,
looking forward to it.
That we're not going to Year 9 camp, except for Matt, who unfortunately is. But everyone else.
But now I've got to
sleeping in their own bed.
I was going to press stop on the recording, but weren't we going to hang around to just sort of, you know?
Press stop on the recording.
Just press stop on that recording.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Thank you. See you next month.
Yeah.